The night my brother stood at a podium in front of 80 people and introduced himself as the new head of our family, he had no idea I was sitting 12 feet away with a 48-page forensic accounting report, 7 categories of documented evidence, a signature analysis from a certified forensic document examiner, and a criminal investigation that had been filed with the district attorney's office 3 weeks earlier. He had stolen $442,630 from our dying mother's living trust. He had forged her signature on withdrawal authorization forms while she was hospitalized and too cognitively impaired to hold a pen. He had used that money on a $140,000 luxury SUV, a $70,000 kitchen renovation, $96,000 in personal credit card debt, gambling losses, and luxury vacations to places his salary could never have funded. And he was standing at a microphone talking about family values. He had spent 18 months believing I was too busy, too passive, or too grief-stricken to notice. He had spent 18 months being wrong. If you are the person in your family who does everything and gets nothing but grief in return, stay with me, because this one is for you. My mother, Patricia Hargrove, spent the last 4 years of her life losing herself one day at a time. Dementia does not announce itself with a single dramatic moment. It arrives in pieces. A repeated story you've already heard 3 times that week. A missed medication. Standing in the kitchen holding a coffee mug with no memory of why she walked in. Then a hospitalization. Then another. Then the morning she called me by her sister's name and held that name for the entire visit. I am a registered nurse. I have watched this disease dismantle people from the inside. I know its stages, its vocabulary, its progression curves. I have sat with families at the exact moment they understood that the person they knew was not coming back. Knowing the clinical language does not protect you from what it feels like to watch it happen to your own mother. For 12 years before the diagnosis, I had already been managing her life. Not because anyone asked me to, because she needed it done and I was the one who showed up to do it. Her cardiologist appointments, her pulmonology follow-ups, her prescription management, her homeowner's insurance, her property tax filing, her furnace servicing, her gutters. I lived 40 minutes from her house. I made that drive twice a week, sometimes 3 times, without once being asked to put it in the family group chat for recognition. Jason lived 20 minutes closer and showed up 4 times a year. Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, and whenever something financial was being discussed or signed. When Mom established her living trust with the estate attorney 8 years ago, she named both of us as co-trustees. That was her decision and I accepted it completely. It was her estate. She had the right to administer it however she chose. The trust held everything she had built over 60 years. The family home appraised at $850,000. An investment portfolio managed by a wealth advisory firm, valued at $1.1 million. And $450,000 in liquid cash reserves, held in a trust management account at the financial institution. $2.4 million. Built slowly, carefully, over a lifetime of modest income and consistent choices. When Mom died in March, I spent the first weeks handling everything a death requires. The death certificates, the funeral home, the obituary, the notifications to Social Security, to Medicare, to the financial institution, to the estate attorney. Jason attended the funeral in a dark suit that looked new. He gave a speech that was mostly about himself. He cried once, briefly, in a way that read as performance to anyone who had watched him operate for 52 years. 3 months after her death, I sat down at my kitchen table to begin the formal trust administration. I had a legal pad, a cup of coffee, and a checklist from the estate attorney. The investment portfolio would take the most time. The cash reserves were straightforward. $450,000, less final care expenses and administrative fees that I estimated at $30,000 to $40,000, should have left me with roughly $410,000 in liquid assets ready for distribution or reinvestment per the trust terms. I logged into the trust management portal. The account balance was $7,412. I stared at that number for a long time. My first thought was that I was reading the wrong account. I navigated back. I confirmed the account number. I confirmed the trust name. I refreshed the page. $7,412. I called the financial institution's trust services line. I provided my credentials as co-trustee. I confirmed my identity through 3 layers of security verification. I asked the representative to walk me through the account transaction history. There was a pause on the line. Then she said carefully that there had been a significant number of withdrawals over the prior 18 months, and she would send me the complete transaction log immediately. I said thank you. I hung up. I put my coffee cup in the sink and I stood at the kitchen counter for a while. $442,630. I called Jason. He answered on the second ring. His voice was entirely, completely steady. He said, "Mom approved all of those." I said, "I see." That was all I said. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell him what I was already thinking, because in that moment something in me went very still. Not numb. Not devastated. Still in the specific way that comes when you understand exactly what has happened and you understand exactly what you are going to do about it. Like a door closing. Quietly. With a very solid lock. I thought about the last 12 years. I thought about the Tuesday evenings I spent at her house sorting her medications into a weekly organizer while she watched the news. I thought about the 3 times I drove 40 minutes in a February ice storm because the night staff called to say she was agitated and asking for family. I thought about the legal documents I had organized and filed and cross-referenced so that when this moment came, when her estate needed to be administered carefully and correctly, everything would be in order. It was all in order, including the things Jason had done to it. I had worked in healthcare for over 2 decades. I had filed 2 reports in my career on family members who financially exploited vulnerable patients. I knew what the pattern looked like. I knew how it was done and I knew how it was defended. And I knew that if my mother had approved those withdrawals, there would be documentation. And if the documentation existed, I was entitled to see it. And if the documentation had been falsified, I was in possession of evidence. I went back to my laptop and I started reading. Here is something I want to say to anyone watching this who has a family member they love and want to trust. You are not foolish for not wanting to look directly at something terrible. You are human. There is a version of willful blindness that comes not from stupidity but from the completely understandable refusal to believe that someone who shares your history and your parents and your last name is capable of something this cold. I had been choosing not to look directly at Jason for years. Let me show you what I had been refusing to see. Jason had carried the title of mom's favorite son the way some men carry a business card. Constantly, and with the implication that it meant something about his worth relative to everyone else. He mentioned it at family dinners. He referenced it in toasts. He used it to position himself as the authority whenever the family needed to make a collective decision about anything. He was 4 years older than me. He was the oldest. He carried the family name. In his internal logic, this translated into an entitlement to more say, more credit, more eventually. His finances had been a running source of low-grade family anxiety for 15 years. He worked in commercial real estate. His income was commission-based and cyclical. His wife Jennifer had a lifestyle orientation that was entirely disconnected from the actual income coming into the household. They lived in a house that required a mortgage that required a good year to service. They drove cars that were visually impressive and financially questionable. They vacationed publicly, posted everything, and talked about their trips as though abundance was their natural state. I watched this for years. I knew the math didn't add up. I told myself it was their business. Here is where the timeline gets precise. 22 months before Mom died, her cognitive decline escalated significantly. She had a hospitalization in September. 11 days in the memory care unit. Her attending physician documented in that admission note that she was experiencing moderate to severe cognitive impairment and was unable to consistently understand or communicate about financial or legal matters. Jason visited twice during that hospitalization. The following month, October, the first trust withdrawal was processed. $1,200. Small. Unremarkable if you weren't looking. I wasn't looking yet. 14 months before Mom died, Jason sent a photo to the family group chat. A new vehicle. Enormous. The kind of vehicle that signals arrival. When someone in the chat asked how he'd managed it, he said business had been strong, that he'd closed a major deal in the third quarter. I liked the photo and moved on. That vehicle, as the forensic investigation later confirmed, cost $140,000. It was purchased using a transfer from the trust account dated 2 days before the photo was posted. 12 months before she died, Jennifer posted a home renovation reveal on her social media. New kitchen, quartz countertops, professional-grade appliances, custom cabinetry, an island that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The caption said something about finally having the kitchen she dreamed about. $70,000. Trust account. Same month. 8 months before she died, they posted from the Maldives. An overwater bungalow with a glass floor panel showing the reef below. Jennifer tagged the resort. It was the kind of resort whose entry-level room rate I looked up out of curiosity, and then stopped thinking about because I didn't want to do the math. I did not do the math. 3 months before Mom died, I was at her care facility updating her medication list with the floor nurse. Late afternoon. I was finishing up when I saw Jason walking down the hall toward me. He hadn't told anyone he was coming. He looked slightly startled to see me. We talked briefly. He spent about 20 minutes with Mom, who was having a difficult day, and barely tracked the conversation. On his way out, he stopped at the nurse's station and asked about the process for getting trust authorization documents witnessed. He said he was trying to get ahead of things administratively. The nurse told him to contact the trust attorney. He nodded and left. She mentioned this to me 2 weeks later as a footnote in a different conversation. At the time I noted it and filed it away. And then there was the Christmas dinner comment. 3 years before all of this, my cousin had asked casually how Mom's estate planning was structured. Jason picked up his glass of wine and said without a pause, without a smile, in the same tone you use to state an obvious fact, one way or another that trust ends up with me. My aunt laughed because she assumed it was a joke. I remember looking at him and feeling a small cold thing in my chest that I immediately decided to ignore. I'm not ignoring it anymore. There is one more thing I have to tell you about Jason because I think it explains a great deal about how a person gets to the place where stealing from a dying parent becomes something they can rationalize. Jason genuinely believed he deserved more. Not as a negotiating position. Not as an opening offer in some imagined inheritance discussion. He genuinely, architecturally believed that his existence as the older child, as the son, as the one who carried the family name forward, entitled him to a larger share of what their mother had built. He had said versions of this belief out loud at various points over the years in ways that no one had ever directly challenged. He said it as though it were obvious, as though the logic were so settled it required no defense. At a family gathering 2 summers before Mom died, when someone asked him directly whether he felt it was fair that Ashley had been handling everything alone, Jason set down his drink and said, "She chose that. Nobody asked her to play martyr. She likes the control, that's why she does it." He genuinely believed that. At a dinner 6 months into the scheme, when Jennifer asked him whether he felt any concern about the withdrawals, he said, "She's not tracking it. And honestly, by the time she figures it out, it'll be too late to do anything about it." Jennifer replied, "And if she does notice?" He said, "Then we tell her Mom approved it. Ashley doesn't know what Mom was and wasn't capable of signing. She's a nurse, not a lawyer." He genuinely believed that too. He believed that Ashley as a nurse had a job. A stable, respectable, middle-class job with a pension and a salary, and that was sufficient for her. He had a lifestyle to maintain. He had a position in a social world that required resources to sustain. He had Jennifer, whose entire sense of herself was constructed around the visible markers of a certain kind of success. The cars, the house, the vacations, the kitchen, the clothes. He had obligations to that identity that Ashley, living in her suburban Ohio house, driving her sensible car, eating dinner alone most nights because she was either working or at Mom's, simply did not understand. This is not speculation. His defense attorney's initial filings, which became part of the public court record, contained exactly this framing. That Jason had reasonably believed his mother intended for him to manage and benefit from the trust assets. That the withdrawals represented an advance on an inheritance that was morally already his. That the family's understanding of the trust had always included his central role in its management. The forensic evidence and the forged signatures made that argument impossible to sustain in a courtroom. But I want you to understand that he believed it. Right up until the moment that case filing appeared on the projector screen in front of 80 people, some part of Jason Hargrove believed he had simply taken what was his. When my mother established her living trust and designated the financial institution to manage the investment and liquid accounts, the institution set up a standard administrative portal for the co-trustees. Login credentials, account management, document upload, statement access. Standard. Jason knew about that portal. He had been using it. He had, in fact, been counting on it being the only record of account activity. He was wrong about that. What he did not know was that the same institution maintained a separate archival audit system. A compliance backend read-only that ran parallel to the standard portal and logged everything. Every login attempt. Every successful authentication. Every document viewed. Every authorization form submitted. Every withdrawal initiated. Every IP address from every device that touched the account. Every timestamp, down to the second for 18 months of account history. It existed because the institution had been party to a fiduciary fraud lawsuit several years earlier and had built the system as a risk management measure. It was not advertised in the standard trustee orientation materials. The trust attorney had mentioned it to me once, offhandedly, during a conversation about estate structure. She had given me the access credentials in a follow-up email. I had filed that email without reading it closely and not thought about it again. The night I received the transaction log from the trust account, I went looking for that email. I found it. I logged in. What loaded on my screen was 18 months of account history in a format I had never seen from the standard portal. Every transaction I already knew about was there, but now attached to the full context. The timestamp to the second. The IP address of the device that initiated the transaction. The scanned copy of the authorization document attached. The login record of who had accessed the account and when. 87 transactions. I started at the beginning. The first transaction was dated the week of Mom's September hospitalization. The one where she spent 11 days in memory care with documented moderate to severe cognitive impairment. $1,200. Transferred to an external account. Authorization form attached, bearing my mother's signature. I looked at that signature for a long time. I am not a handwriting expert, but I had been reading my mother's handwriting my entire life. Christmas cards. Notes tucked into things she gave me. Forms I had watched her sign. I knew what her signature looked like. I knew what it had started to look like in her later years, with the tremor that had developed. That signature did not look right. I kept scrolling. By month 3, the withdrawals were between $8,000 and $15,000 each. By month 6, there were months with 3 or 4 transactions totaling more than $30,000 combined. Several authorizations showed amounts that were unusually round numbers, which forensic accountants later told me is a behavioral marker in fabricated documents. Real authorizations tend towards specific functionally derived figures. Fabricated ones tend to be round. I matched withdrawal dates against medical records, which I had full access to as Mom's healthcare proxy. What I found was this. 14 of the largest withdrawals were processed on dates when her medical records documented active hospitalization or acute cognitive episodes. On one date, her clinical notes recorded that she was nonverbal and minimally responsive. On that same date, an authorization form bearing her signature moved $31,000 from the trust account to an external account. My mother could not have signed anything that day. The IP address on that transaction was a subnet I recognized. Jason used it on family video calls. I had seen it on screen shares. I called a forensic accountant the next morning. Her name was Margaret Chin. 23 years in financial fraud investigation and fiduciary litigation. 41 expert witness appearances in court proceedings. She reviewed everything I sent her over the following 6 weeks and delivered a 48-page report. I'm going to tell you what was in it because every single piece of it matters. Receipt 1. A complete withdrawal timeline. $442,630 removed over 18 months. Itemized by date, amount, and receiving account number. Receipt 2. IP address analysis. 91% of all trust portal logins during the period in question originated from a single device. That device was registered to an internet service provider account held in Jason Hargrove's name at his home address. Receipt 3. Bank transfer records. Funds moved from the trust account into a personal checking account held jointly by Jason and Jennifer Hargrove at a separate institution. From there, the funds dispersed to a vehicle financing company, 3 major credit card issuers, a general contractor, a casino wire service, and 2 luxury travel agencies. Receipt 4. The email forwarding discovery. The trust account's associated notification email address had been silently redirected to a secondary address. That address belonged to Jason. The forwarding rule had been set up from the same IP address as the majority of the withdrawals. I had not authorized that forwarding. It was set up without my knowledge. Within those forwarded emails, Margaret found 11 months of correspondence between Jason and Jennifer discussing the trust account, investment performance, upcoming withdrawals, references to the money in language that made clear they regarded it as already belonging to them. The most specific email, dated 13 months before Mom died, was from Jennifer. It said, "Your mother won't even know. Just move the money now." Receipt 5. Signature analysis. Margaret retained a certified forensic document examiner who compared the signatures on the 23 authorization forms against a reference library of my mother's authentic signatures, including documents from before and during her cognitive decline. The conclusion was unambiguous. 17 of the 23 authorization signatures were inconsistent with the subject's verified signature profile. The deviations were systematic and consistent with one another in ways indicating they were produced by the same person imitating her signature rather than her signature at different stages of decline. Receipt 6. An audio recording from a family dinner, captured on a relative's phone that had been recording a video of the meal. Jason's voice in the background, clear and entirely unguarded. "One way or another, that trust ends up with me." Receipt 7. A text message recovered from Jennifer's records through the civil discovery process later, sent to Jason 9 months into the scheme. "Just keep the amounts under 25. Nobody checks if you stay under 25. He hadn't always stayed under 25. 6 weeks after I first opened that audit portal, I met with 2 attorneys. The criminal referral was filed with the state attorney general's office and the county district attorney. 3 weeks later, it was accepted and opened as an active investigation. I told no one. People always want to know, why didn't you call him immediately? Why didn't you confront him? Here's why. Because confronting Jason the moment I had the evidence would have given him hours to move remaining assets, consult a defense attorney, construct a narrative, brief Jennifer, and prepare talking points for every family member he could reach. It would have compressed my advantage into nothing. It would have made me appear reactive, which in trust litigation matters. More than that, I wanted the stage he was going to build himself. I knew Jason. He would not sit quietly in the face of a legal threat he sensed was coming. He would escalate. He would perform. He would create a public moment at which I could show up prepared, and he would not. I needed to let him choose the venue. So I kept going to family events. I answered his texts with normal responses. When he called to check on trust administration progress, I said things were moving along, that the estate attorney had some process items to finalize, that I'd keep him updated. He heard my calm voice and interpreted it as confusion, as grief, as the kind of passive compliance he had been benefiting from his entire life. That is the specific vulnerability of people like Jason. They cannot imagine a version of you that is fully informed and simply waiting. In their model of reality, if you knew, you would be screaming. Your silence means you don't know. Your composure is evidence of your ignorance. He kept spending. He kept talking. He kept behaving exactly as a man who believed he had already won behaves. Meanwhile, in a conference room with my civil litigation team, we were building a case structured for maximum recovery. Asset tracing. Prejudgment attachment filings to prevent him from moving or liquidating assets before the judgment was entered. Documentation of Jennifer's knowing participation, which would allow us to reach their joint property, not just his individually held assets. If you believe earned justice hits harder when it's prepared carefully and executed precisely, drop a comment below. Because this is what prepared and precise looks like. Every word Jason said in any conversation during those 11 weeks went into the file. There was one moment when I thought it might unravel early. 7 weeks into the investigation, Jason called me on a Sunday afternoon. Not a text. A phone call. Unexpected. He opened with small talk that felt slightly too casual, the kind of casual that someone performs when they are trying to sound like they are not calling for a reason. Then he said, "I've been thinking about the trust portal. You still have access to that, right? The main one." I said yes. He said, "I'm trying to pull together some records. The bank has been difficult. Is there any documentation you've accessed that I should know about? Like anything unusual in the system?" I understood exactly what he was asking. He had either sensed something or someone had said something to him, or he had simply gotten nervous in the way people get nervous when they have done something they know is wrong and enough time has passed that they start wondering when it surfaces. I said, "I've been pulling the standard administrative statements. Same as you. The estate attorney wants everything documented before we move to formal distribution. Standard process." He said, "Right. Yeah. That makes sense." He paused. Then he said, "And you haven't talked to anyone about the accounts? No attorneys or anything yet?" I said, "Jason, I'm a nurse. I'm not in the habit of talking to attorneys. When that time comes, I'll loop you in." He said, "Good. Good. That's good." We said goodbye. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that call. Then I called Margaret and told her we needed to accelerate the timeline. Then, 41 days after the criminal referral was accepted, Jason sent a group text to 43 people announcing the family legacy celebration dinner. A dinner honoring our mother's memory and legacy. Private ballroom at Clearwater Country Club. Cocktail hour, catered dinner, family photo slideshow. He expected 80 guests. Business partners. Extended family. Church friends. Mom's neighbors. People from every corner of the social world he had spent years constructing. He wrote in the text that he wanted to formally introduce himself as the new head of the Hargrove family and share his vision for stewarding Mom's legacy going forward. He sent it to me in the same group message. I read it twice. Then I replied to the group text. I said, "I'll be there." Jason did not spend the 2 weeks before the dinner quietly. He had apparently developed some instinct that I was not entirely passive, though he could not have known the scope of what I had prepared. Something in my manner, or perhaps simply his own guilt creating noise, made him decide to run a preemptive campaign. He called my cousin Diane and told her I had been behaving strangely since Mom's death. That grief was affecting my judgment, that I had developed an unhealthy fixation on the trust finances, that he was genuinely worried about my mental state and had been considering whether to involve a family friend who was a therapist. He added, according to Diane when she finally told me everything weeks later, "Ashley has always had a problem with the fact that Mom and I were close. She spent 12 years being the helper so she could control things. That's not love. That's strategy." He called my Aunt Ruth and told her that I had always been jealous of his relationship with Mom, that the 12 years of caregiving had been, in his reading, less about love than about positioning myself for financial control, that he had been patient with this dynamic for a long time, but that the family deserved to know the truth about my motives before they were asked to respect my role in the estate. He told two of Mom's church friends that he had discovered irregularities in the trust administration and suspected I had made unauthorized transactions. He said he was consulting an attorney and hoped to resolve things without involving the courts for the family's sake. According to one of those friends who found me after the dinner and told me through tears what he had said, his exact words were, "Honestly, I'm not surprised. Ashley always resented that Mom left me in charge of the important things. When people feel overlooked, they act out. I just didn't think she'd go this far." He told that to a woman who had sat at my mother's bedside with me on 3 separate occasions. A woman who had watched me manage Mom's care for 4 years. I want you to understand, that is the specific cruelty of what Jason did in those 2 weeks. He was not just defending himself. He was weaponizing every sacrifice I had ever made and reframing it as evidence of my bad character. Every year of caregiving became sinister motive. Every act of showing up became manipulation. He was trying to make sure that when the truth came out, people would filter it through the idea that I had always been the problem. Within 10 days, I received 3 separate phone calls from relatives expressing concern. 2 of them were gentle. One of them was not. She told me that Jason had always been the more stable of the 2 of us, that perhaps I should consider grief counseling, that it was not healthy to fixate on money matters during bereavement. I said, "Thank you. I appreciate you reaching out. I'm really looking forward to the dinner." That was all I said. I want to be clear about something. I have heard the advice that says you should explain yourself, that you should correct the record, that you should defend your reputation to the people who matter. And maybe that is right in some situations. But I have also learned, through 52 years of being the steady one in a family that consistently rewarded noise over substance, that explaining yourself to people who have already decided what they want to believe is a fundamental waste of the energy you need for what comes next. Jason's campaign had one unintended effect. It made sure that every single person who was going to walk into that country club ballroom had already formed an opinion. They had all preloaded a version of me before they saw me. That version was about to be corrected in front of everyone simultaneously. Clearwater Country Club. A Thursday evening in October. The private ballroom was white and gold, the kind of room that makes events feel more significant than they might otherwise be. Round tables set for 10 white linens, low floral centerpieces, a cocktail bar along the far wall. The slideshow Jason had arranged was already cycling when I arrived 15 minutes into the cocktail hour. Family photographs. Mom at various ages in various seasons. Jason and Mom. Jason's family. Jason at events I half remembered. 3 photos included me. I wore a navy dress. I carried a black binder. I found a table near the back and said hello to my Aunt Ruth, who hugged me and searched my face in the way people do when they've been told to worry about you. I kissed my cousin Diane on the cheek. Diane had been one of the ones Jason had briefed. She held my arms when I greeted her and said, "I'm glad you came." I could hear the relief in it, the relief of someone who had been given a complicated story and didn't entirely believe it. Across the room, Jason was at the center of a cluster of guests, glass of champagne in hand, laughing at something someone had said. He was wearing a dark suit recently pressed. His posture had the specific looseness of a man who is entirely comfortable with the version of events he has arranged. Jennifer was beside him in a cream-colored dress I recognized from her social media. She was doing the thing she always did at events, scanning the room while appearing not to, cataloging who was there and what it meant for her own positioning. They both looked like people who had already decided how the evening would end. At 8:15, a tap on the microphone brought the room to attention. Jason walked to the podium. He was polished. I will give him that. He began with their mother. He talked about Patricia Hargrove as a woman of extraordinary love and generosity. He talked about the values she had instilled. He talked about the importance of family and the weight of legacy. He said that in the aftermath of loss, families need someone to step forward and provide direction, and that he intended to be that person for this family. Some guests were nodding. Some were watching with the pleasant, slightly distant attention of people at an event they've been told matters. Then he looked at me. He said, still smiling, that he was aware there had been some family tension recently. That grief was complicated. That he hoped the family could move forward with the same grace and generosity of spirit that their mother had modeled. He said he wanted tonight to be about unity. Several people turned to look at me. I was already standing. I said, Jason, before you close, I'd like a few minutes. I think there are some things everyone here should hear. I said it in exactly the tone you use when you're making a reasonable procedural request at a meeting. Not aggressive, not emotional. The tone of someone who has already decided and is simply executing. Jason hesitated for exactly one beat. Then he gestured toward the microphone with an open hand and a smile that said he was being magnanimous, that he was giving the unstable sister her moment before gently reclaiming the room. I walked to the stage. I opened the binder. I looked at the A/V technician and said, I'm going to need my laptop connected to the projector, please. It took the room about 90 seconds to understand what it was watching. Then it went quiet in a way I have never experienced in any other setting. Not the polite quiet of a formal event. Not the uncomfortable quiet of an awkward speech. The complete, pressurized quiet of 80 people simultaneously recalibrating everything they had walked in believing. I said, 3 months after our mother's funeral, I sat down to review the trust accounts. The liquid reserve account held her cash assets. It should have contained approximately $450,000. I'm going to show you what the balance was when I checked. First slide. $7,412. White text on a dark background. Pling. Unavoidable. I gave people 10 seconds. I said, over the previous 18 months, $442,630 had been withdrawn. I am going to show you where it went. Second slide. The withdrawal timeline. 87 transactions listed chronologically. Dates in the left column. Dollar amounts in the middle. Receiving accounts on the right. The full 18 months of systematic depletion. I heard the room shift. Not a gasp. More like a collective exhale. The sound of people releasing a breath they hadn't known they were holding. I said, the financial institution maintains an archival audit system that logs every interaction with trust accounts. Every login. Every transaction. Every IP address. The IP address associated with 91% of these withdrawals matches a device registered to my brother's home internet service account. Third slide. The IP log summary. A clean technical layout. Jason's home address in the right column, appearing next to transaction after transaction. I heard someone at the far table say very quietly, "Oh my God." I did not look at them. I said, the funds were transferred to a personal checking account held jointly by Jason and Jennifer Hargrove. From there they went to several destinations. I'm going to name them. Fourth slide. The itemized spending record. $140,000 to a vehicle financing company. $96,000 across 3 personal credit card accounts. $70,000 to a general contractor. Gambling wire transfers totaling $31,000 across 4 transactions. Luxury travel agency charges totaling over $22,000. The room was completely still. I said, each withdrawal was authorized using a form bearing my mother's signature. I retained a certified forensic document examiner to analyze those signatures against her verified signature library. 5th slide. The examiner's report summary. The conclusion in the center of the slide. 17 of 23 authorization signatures are inconsistent with the subject's authenticated signature profile and are consistent with forgery by a single individual. Jason said, "This is fabricated. She's been preparing this for months, this is." I said without raising my voice, without looking at him, "I'm not finished." Nobody in that room moved. I said, "I want to show you 2 pieces of correspondence. The first is an email recovered from the trust account's forwarding records." 6th slide. The email. Jennifer's address at the top. The date. And the text displayed in the same font size as everything else on the screen, readable from the back of the room. "Your mother won't even know. Just move the money now." I heard a sound near the doors. Jennifer had pushed back her chair and was walking toward the exit. She was moving with the controlled urgency of someone trying not to appear to be fleeing. An event staff member was positioned near the double doors. He didn't reach out his hand. He simply stood there, present large between her and the exit. She registered him. She stopped. She stood against the wall near the door for the rest of the presentation with her arms crossed, and she did not say a word. I said, "The second piece of evidence is an audio recording from a family dinner. Most of the people in this room were at that dinner." I played it. 11 seconds. Jason's voice, completely clear, completely unmistakable in a room full of people who had heard that voice for decades. One way or another, that trust ends up with me. There is a sound a room makes when the last piece of something clicks into place. It is not a gasp. It is not a murmur. It is more like the sound of air, of the specific collective understanding settling over 80 people at the same moment. Several people at the table nearest the stage turned to look at Jason. Not with outrage. With something quieter than outrage. The expression of people recalculating a person they thought they knew. I looked at Jason for the first time since I had walked to the stage. He was not the man who had been at that podium 20 minutes earlier. The polish was entirely gone. He was red in a specific way, not the red of embarrassment, the red of someone experiencing something physiological, blood pressure, adrenaline, the body's response to a reality it cannot outrun. He was gripping the table in front of him. His mouth was open and then closed and then open again. He said, "She planned all of this. She has been building a case against me. She manipulated the records. She forged the documents herself. I can prove that. I have an attorney." At the table directly to his left, his business associate, a man I had met twice over the years at holiday events, stood up from his chair, picked up his jacket from the back of it, and walked out of the room without looking at anyone. He did not say a word. He simply left. 2 of Mom's church friends who had been seated at the same table and who I knew had received Jason's preemptive briefing, stood up together and moved toward the hallway exit. One of them looked at me as she passed my table. She nodded once. That was all. Jason kept talking. His voice was escalating in pitch and speed. He was covering ground, making accusations, contradicting himself, saying things that didn't track with things he had said 30 seconds earlier. His children, seated at a table near the front, had gone completely still in the way adult children go still when they are watching a parent do something that cannot be undone. His son, who was 26 and had always idolized him, had pushed back from the table slightly, as though creating physical distance from what he was watching. His daughter had her head bowed. He was not crying. He was simply not watching. An older man from Mom's church, someone I had known my entire life, a man who had given a reading at her funeral, stood up from his table and walked to where I was sitting. He placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. He said nothing. He walked to the exit. That is the moment I think I will remember most clearly. Not the slide with the bank transfers. Not the audio clip. That quiet hand on my shoulder from a man who had known my mother for 30 years and had just understood in real time what had been done to her. Jason was still talking. I said, "I want to tell everyone here one final thing." The room came back to me. I clicked to the last slide. The district attorney's case filing. The case number. The date of acceptance. The charges listed. Fraud in the first degree. Forgery of a financial instrument. Fiduciary theft. Elder financial exploitation. I said, "This criminal investigation was accepted by the district attorney's office 22 days ago. The forensic accounting report, the signature analysis, the IP records, the email correspondence, and the audio recording have all been submitted as supporting evidence. I want to be transparent that I did not come to this event to ambush my brother. The investigation was already underway. What I came here to do was make sure that every person in this room had access to the same information before they were asked to recognize any form of leadership over a trust that was systematically robbed while my mother was dying." I closed the binder. I said, "That's everything." I walked back to my seat. The room took a long time to move. Jason was still speaking. He was not making any of it better. His voice had the quality of a person trying to run on a surface that keeps shifting under his feet, louder and faster and less coherent with every sentence. He said the charges were politically motivated. He said I had hired someone to fabricate the forensic report. He said he had documentation that proved everything was authorized. He said this was the most disgraceful thing he had ever witnessed. He said he was going to sue me. At the table to my right, my cousin Diane had her hand pressed over her mouth. Her husband was watching Jason with an expression that had moved past shock into something quieter and much colder. My Aunt Ruth was sitting very straight with her hands folded on the table, staring at the last slide, which was still on the projector screen. The case number. The list of charges. He did not look at me. He did not look at Jason. She looked at that screen for a very long time. The room continued to empty, not all at once, but steadily, the way a tide goes out. Jennifer did not speak. When the presentation ended and people began moving, she left through the side door without looking at anyone. I watched her go. Jason was still at his table when I left. He was alone at it. If this story landed somewhere real for you, I want to hear from you in the comments. If you have ever been the person who showed up, who managed, who stayed quiet and competent while someone else performed and took credit, and then had to watch that person stand at a microphone and call themselves the family's leader, you are exactly who this channel is for. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment below. Tell me your version. I read them. Stay right here because I am going to tell you exactly what happened to Jason and Jennifer after that night, and I want you to hear every single part of it. The morning after the dinner, Jason called me 4 times before 9 a.m. I did not answer. He sent a text that said, "We need to talk before this goes any further. You made a serious mistake." I forwarded it to my attorney and did not reply. Jennifer sent a message through my cousin asking whether there was any possibility of a private conversation before things escalated beyond repair. She used the word private twice. She used the phrase beyond repair once. She did not use the words "I am sorry" at any point in the message. I forwarded that to my attorney as well. The district attorney's office made direct contact with Jason's personal attorney within 2 weeks of the dinner. The criminal process moved at its own pace, which is slower than I wanted and faster than Jason expected. He retained a criminal defense attorney. I know this because the civil litigation, which was already underway and which generated formal correspondence between legal teams, made his representation structure visible. The civil lawsuit I filed named Jason as the primary defendant on claims of breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conversion, and elder financial exploitation. Jennifer was named as a secondary defendant based on her documented participation in the scheme, specifically her email correspondence directing Jason to proceed, the financial transfers through their joint account which established her direct benefit from the stolen funds, and additional text message evidence recovered through discovery that demonstrated her ongoing involvement and awareness across multiple months of the theft. She had known. She had participated. She had encouraged. The law treated that accordingly. The criminal charges were substantial. Fraud in the first degree, forgery of a financial instrument, fiduciary theft, and elder financial exploitation under Ohio's enhanced protection statutes for crimes against vulnerable adults. The elder exploitation enhancement was significant because it increased both the sentencing exposure and the restitution requirements. The civil judgment, when it came, was $614,000. It covered the stolen principal, attorney and forensic expert fees, damages for breach of fiduciary duty, and punitive damages calculated to reflect the deliberate and sustained nature of the fraud. The punitive component existed specifically because Jason had not made an impulsive mistake. He had run an organized, calculated 18-month operation against a dying woman who trusted him. $614,000. Jason did not have $614,000. He had a mortgaged house whose equity had been largely depleted because he had been using the trust money to service personal debt rather than paying down his mortgage. He had a vehicle that was now a documented exhibit in a criminal proceeding. He had credit cards that had been partially paid off with funds that were the subject of a civil judgment, which created additional layers of exposure. The house went to satisfy part of the civil judgment. It was listed, sold, and the proceeds applied. Jason and Jennifer moved out on a Tuesday. I know this from the public real estate records. I did not drive by. The vehicle was seized as part of the criminal asset recovery process. His professional licensing came under review by the Ohio State Real Estate Board. Financial fraud, forgery, and a breach of fiduciary duty constitute grounds for license revocation. The board found those grounds. He was not permitted to practice. He filed for bankruptcy protection 11 months after the dinner. The filing was contested. In most jurisdictions, including Ohio, civil judgments entered on the basis of intentional fraud are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. The court agreed. The judgment survived. The debt remained. Jennifer filed for divorce 8 months after the dinner. The financial infrastructure of their life together had been entirely dismantled. The house was gone. The vehicles were gone. The social identity, the life they had built on other people's money and projected as their own achievement, had been publicly exposed for exactly what it was. The friends Jennifer had spent years referencing as the benchmark for the lifestyle she deserved stopped calling. The invitations stopped arriving. The social calendar that had been full of the kinds of events she posted about went quiet. She had gambled everything on a scheme whose entire foundation was that I would never find out. That I was too passive, too distracted, too busy caring for a dying woman to notice what was being taken from her. She had sent an email explicitly instructing Jason to proceed because his mother would never know. She had calculated the risk and decided I was the acceptable margin of error. He was wrong about me. I was told this by my cousin, who told me without editorializing, just as information. I received it the same way. The relatives who had repeated Jason's narrative about my mental state, who had called me to express concern, who had nodded along with his assessment of my jealousy and instability, reached out in the weeks after the dinner. Some by phone, some by text, some through other family members. The messages followed a recognizable pattern. Words like shocked. Words like I had no idea. Words like I hope you know I always believed in you. I was gracious with the ones who had been genuinely misled. I was brief with the ones who had been more than willing to believe the worst of me because it was convenient or because they had always found Jason more entertaining to agree with. A few people I had known my entire life I simply did not speak to again. I made those decisions clearly and without resentment. I made them based on who those people had shown me they were when the information was ambiguous and the easier choice was to doubt me. I am not angry about any of it. I am just done. There is a version of this story where I'm supposed to tell you that the hardest part was not winning but learning to forgive. That true healing came when I chose to release the anger. That I eventually reached out to Jason and found something worth preserving. That story is not mine. What I found on the other side of all of this was not forgiveness. It was clarity. And clarity, it turns out, is worth substantially more. The trust was restored. Asset recovery proceedings through the civil judgment and liquidated assets brought back $384,000 into the estate. The investment portfolio, which Jason had not managed to touch because it was held through the advisory firm and required additional authorization steps he could not forge cleanly, remained intact. The family home was preserved. It passed through the estate correctly and in full. I retired ahead of schedule. I bought a house on a lake in eastern Ohio. A modest house by any reasonable measure, but it has a back porch that faces the water. In the mornings I sit there with coffee and I listen to the birds and I watch the light change on the surface of the lake, and I do not think about Jason Hargrove. I volunteer twice a week at a senior care facility 40 minutes from my house. I help families understand how to structure protections for vulnerable relatives. I help trustees understand their rights and their responsibilities. I help adult children recognize the warning signs of financial exploitation before it reaches the stage mine did. Some of the families I speak with are already past the warning signs. They are sitting at their own kitchen tables with numbers that don't make sense and relatives who have very smooth explanations for everything. I tell them what I know. I tell them about archival audit portals. I tell them about forensic document examiners. I tell them about fiduciary theft statutes and elder exploitation enhancements and what it means, legally and practically, to have IP logs. Most importantly, I tell them this: the person who did the work has more power than they know. The person who stayed, who managed, who kept the records and attended the appointments and knew the account numbers and understood the estate structure, that person is not without recourse. That person has receipts. Sometimes they just have to learn where to look for them. My mother built $2.4 million over 60 years of quiet, consistent, unglamorous work. She asked almost nothing of the people around her. She trusted both of her children to protect what she had built. One of them spent 18 months stealing it from her while she was dying. The other one sat at a kitchen table one evening with a number that didn't add up, went very still, and spent the next 7 months building the case that would dismantle him entirely. Jason thought stealing from a dying woman would give him the life he believed he deserved. It gave him fraud charges, a collapsed marriage, a revoked license, a civil judgment he will spend years failing to satisfy, and the permanent memory of standing at a podium in front of 80 people while his own recorded voice played through the speakers. I hope every person in that room remembers the sound of it. I know I will. If you believe that the people who do the work deserve to protect what they built, and that the people who steal from the vulnerable deserve exactly what comes for them, subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. Because somewhere right now, there is a woman sitting at a kitchen table staring at a balance that doesn't make sense. She hasn't started yet, but she's about to.